Welcome, curious minds, to another deep dive. Today, we're plunging into a topic that's not just making headlines, but is really poised to completely reshape how we interact with the digital world. We're talking about the evolution of the internet and specifically the promises of Web3. Okay, let's unpack this.
Yeah, absolutely. We're exploring Web3, which, well, a lot of people are calling it the ownership web.
Mhm.
It's essentially a new chapter for the internet, maybe the next big phase, designed specifically to fix some pretty big issues from the earlier versions. And what's really fascinating, I think, is how global this whole thing is. You see developers and projects flourishing everywhere from Istanbul to Singapore, Thailand, Dubai, even the UK. It's genuinely a worldwide movement.
Right. And our mission today for you listening is to try and cut through all the noise you might hear about it. There's a lot of noise. We've sifted through, well, quite a stack of sources, articles, research papers, interviews with experts to pull out the most important insights. Think of this as your shortcut, maybe, to being genuinely well-informed about a topic that looks set to transform, well, everything: industries, society, culture. I want to deliver those surprising facts, maybe a little humor, keep you hooked, without feeling totally overwhelmed. So let's start at the beginning. Where did this all come from? If we look back, way back to the early days, the internet started with what we now call Web 1. That was the read-only web, roughly the 90s to the early 2000s. Its superpower, looking back, was actually something quite simple, but really revolutionary for the time. It allowed third-party developers to just build on open protocols. Anyone could come along and create something new. It fostered this incredible kind of community-driven development. Early websites, they felt a lot like digital magazines or maybe classified ads. You could browse, you could read, but, well, that was pretty much it.
Then things changed. Around 2002, maybe a bit later for some things, we shifted pretty dramatically into Web 2. That's the read-write web. And this was a huge change because it suddenly gave you, the individual user, the power to create and share your own content. Think about the explosion of blogs, social media platforms like Facebook and Twitter, YouTube. It just took off. This era, Web 2, it truly democratized publishing in a way, allowed pretty much everyone to contribute something to the web.
But, and there's always a but, isn't there? With all that newfound freedom to create, there was this kind of hidden catch for users, almost like a Faustian bargain, as some people put it. While you were pouring just immense value into these platforms, all your tweets, your photos, your videos, all that personal data, that value, it was mostly swallowed up, wasn't it, by just a handful of these huge centralized companies: Apple, Google, Facebook, Amazon. They built these like digital walled gardens around everything you created.
Exactly. And if we connect this to the bigger picture, what happened was Web 2 ended up creating these incredibly powerful new gatekeepers. Giants like Facebook, they stifled competition, often just by acquiring promising upstarts, like Instagram back in 2012 or WhatsApp and Oculus VR in 2014. These companies, they became the intermediaries for almost everything you did online. And this also led straight to massive data harvesting and, frankly, significant privacy loss for everyone. These platforms collected so much intimate data: what you buy, what you eat, what you say, where you go. All of it used to fuel targeted ads. There was even an internal Facebook audit that noted how their own algorithms exploited the human brain's attraction to divisiveness, which is worrying. And it drove these self-reinforcing echo chambers of extremism. That's a direct quote.
Wow. And their control didn't just stop at the data, did it? We saw pretty clear examples of direct censorship, too, like Facebook blocking all news content in Australia during a national crisis. That even affected access to emergency services information, which is scary. And then you got companies like Apple and Google charging what really felt like exorbitant fees, the 30% Apple tax on in-app sales. They even tried to tax gas fees on crypto apps at one point, which Coinbase basically said was impossible to even implement.
Yeah, the monopoly rents, they call them. And fundamentally, what was missing in Web 2, the core problem maybe, was any clear concept of digital property rights for the user. You didn't truly own the virtual goods you created in games or platforms. You couldn't easily monetize your own data, even though it was valuable. And you had very little, almost no say in how these massive services that you relied on were actually run. Every single tweet, every photo, every video you uploaded, it generated value, immense value in aggregate. But you couldn't really capture or control that value yourself.
And that's precisely the problem that Web3 steps in to solve, right? Presenting itself as the ownership web. It's specifically designed, or at least intended, to put those digital property rights back into your hands, the user's hands. Now, of course, it's not like everyone's convinced this is the way forward. Even Tim Berners-Lee, the inventor of the World Wide Web itself, he's expressed some skepticism about blockchain, which is one of Web3's core technologies. He suggested it's maybe too slow, too expensive, and too public for handling personal data.
That's true, and those are valid concerns, especially early on. But despite that skepticism, Web3 is built on these foundational technologies that really aim to directly address those very issues and the ownership problem. At its very heart, maybe the most fundamental piece, you have tokens. Chris Dixon from Andreessen Horowitz, he puts it really well, I think. He says tokens are the building block of Web3, much like websites were the building block for Web 1. But here's a really transformative insight, the key difference. Unlike Web 1, where a website was just information you read, a token is information you can own. It fundamentally changes your relationship from just being a passive consumer to being an active, maybe even vested participant in the digital world.
Okay, so we're talking about a completely new kind of digital ownership here. What are the main types? Are these tokens all the same?
Good question. No, they're not. Think of tokens mainly in two broad categories. First, you have fungible tokens. These are like a dollar bill or maybe a vote in a system. One is exactly like another. They're completely interchangeable. Think ERC20 on Ethereum. And then second, you have non-fungible tokens, or NFTs, which you've probably heard a lot about. These are unique, one-of-a-kind digital items, like a specific piece of digital art that only you own, or a unique game item. That's often ERC721. The key thing, though, for both types is they enable you to truly own digital assets in a way that just wasn't possible before. Empowering a lot of this, making it work automatically, are smart contracts.
Smart contracts. Okay.
Yeah.
What exactly are they and how do they make things different from, say, just a regular agreement?
Right. Smart contracts are essentially like automated, unbreakable digital promises or self-executing agreements. Imagine a vending machine. If you put in the right amount of money, it has to give you the drink, right? It's programmed to do that. Smart contracts work kind of similarly. They're basically just code stored on a blockchain that automatically executes the terms of an agreement when specific predefined conditions are met. Crucially, this eliminates the need for middlemen like lawyers or banks to enforce the terms. It's all transparent, immutable, and self-enforcing on the network.
Okay, that makes sense. And the idea of you, the individual, actually holding on to your own digital assets rather than some company holding them for you, that feels like a pretty massive paradigm shift, doesn't it?
Oh, absolutely. That's self-custody. It's a core principle, often summed up by that crypto saying, not your keys, not your coins. It just means you hold and directly control your own digital assets using your private keys without needing permission from or relying on any third-party custodian like a bank or an exchange. This permissionless and censorship-resistant nature, it has really powerful real-world implications. We've seen it used, for instance, to help fund the war effort in Ukraine when traditional channels were difficult, or to help protect Venezuelans from hyperinflation. It can offer a lifeline when traditional financial systems fail or exclude people. And what makes this whole new model financially viable? How do you actually incentivize people to build and maintain these open, decentralized systems? Well, that's where we get into tokenomics. It's basically the economic engine that powers Web3. It designs incentives, often using the native tokens of a network, to reward contributors, developers, users, validators, giving them an economic stake in the projects they help build and secure.
Right, that sounds like a really powerful incentive, giving everyone a direct stake. But how do these decentralized networks actually agree on anything? Like which transactions are valid without a central boss overseeing everything? It feels like it could just be chaos.
That's a great question, and it was a huge hurdle to overcome. The solution lies in consensus algorithms. They're these ingenious mechanisms, these rules, that allow vast decentralized networks of computers to agree on the state of the ledger, the history of transactions, even when no single entity is in charge. And some participants might even be untrustworthy. For instance, Bitcoin traditionally uses something called proof of work, which, yes, as often pointed out, is energy intensive because it involves computational puzzles. But it's important to note that much of the newer innovation in Web3 on networks like Ethereum now, Cardano, Solana, and others is moving to far more energy-efficient proof-of-stake models. In proof-of-stake, participants or validators lock up or stake their own crypto assets to get a chance to validate transactions and secure the network, rather than using raw computing power. It uses vastly less energy.
Okay, so those are some of the fundamental building blocks, tokens, smart contracts, consensus. But how do people actually organize themselves and get things done in this new web, especially if there's no central company calling the shots?
Yeah, this raises a really important practical question. How does coordination happen? And one answer that's emerged is decentralized autonomous organizations, or DAOs. These are basically new forms of internet-native organizations, where strangers, potentially from all over the world, can pool resources like cryptocurrency and coordinate their skills to achieve some common goal, governed by rules encoded in smart contracts. Think of projects like Gitcoin, for example. Token holders there have both a financial stake and a say in governance. They use the DAO structure to match ideas, often for funding public goods or open source software with funders and talent. DAOs are being explored for incredibly complex tasks, too. Everything from governing shared communal assets, kind of applying Elinor Ostrom's Nobel Prize-winning principles for sustainable resource management to the digital world, to even tackling huge global problems like climate change. You see projects like Region Network or Climadeo working in that space using DAO structures.
DAOs sound almost utopian, incredibly democratic and maybe efficient. But my immediate thought is, can something so decentralized actually function effectively in the real world? What are the biggest hurdles they face right now, and I guess what makes them potentially better than traditional company structures?
That's a very fair critique. The potential benefits are significant. Often a much lower cost to organize compared to setting up a traditional company, access to a truly global talent pool from day one, and theoretically significantly greater input and ownership from every member or token holder. However, they absolutely face real hurdles. DAOs often lack clear legal standing in many jurisdictions, which can make things like hiring employees or entering into traditional contracts pretty tricky. They're also still evolving in terms of security. Figuring out robust governance that's resistant to manipulation or cyber attacks is an ongoing challenge. And critically, they require active user engagement to function effectively. It's not a passive system. Members need to participate in voting and decision-making. It's not a set it and forget it kind of thing.
You mentioned privacy and scalability earlier as a challenge for blockchains in general. Are there specific technologies emerging within Web3 to tackle those head on?
Yes, precisely. And this is one of the most exciting areas of research and development right now. Imagine, for example, you could prove you're over 21 without actually showing your driver's license with your birth date and address on it. Or prove you solved a complex mathematical puzzle without revealing the actual solution itself. That's the kind of magic enabled by zero-knowledge proofs, or ZKPs. These are often called the holy grail primitive for blockchains because they allow one party, the prover, to convince another party, the verifier, that they know something or that a statement is true, without revealing any underlying information beyond the truth of the statement itself. This offers crucial benefits for privacy. Think about an activist investor wanting to accumulate a large stock position discreetly, or verifying votes in an election while keeping individual votes anonymous. ZKPs make that possible. And importantly, they also provide a huge boost to scalability for blockchains. Technologies like ZK rollups allow thousands of transactions to be processed off the main chain and then bundled together, with a single ZKP proving their validity on the main chain. This drastically increases transaction throughput and lowers fees, making blockchains much more practical for widespread use.
Okay, wow. So we've delved into some pretty deep tech there that makes Web3 potentially secure, scalable, and private. But let's bring it back to the individual listener. How do you actually step into this new digital frontier and, control your own piece of it? That seems to be where your digital identity and your wallet come in, right? They become like your new passport and bank account combined.
Exactly. That's a great analogy. Wallets are your primary interface to the Web3 world. Much like web browsers were your gateway to Web 1, they manage your private keys, which control your assets, your tokens, your NFTs, but they also increasingly manage your digital identities. And this brings us to the concept of self-sovereign identity, SSI, which is a really powerful idea. Concepts and tools like the Ethereum name service, or ENS, which gives you a human-readable name like your name.eth instead of a long crypto address, and things like Gitcoin Passport, allow you to build up a decentralized record of your credentials, your achievements, your reputation, all controlled by you. Unlike Web 2, where platforms like Facebook or Google essentially owned and gated all your identity information, SSI tools aim to let you control your own virtual self. You can use things like zero-knowledge badges, powered by ZKPs, to prove specific attributes about yourself like I'm over 18 or I have a university degree, without revealing any other sensitive personal data you don't want to share. You decide what to reveal, when, and to whom.
Okay, so we've covered the what and the how. What does this all actually mean for you, the listener, and the world around you? How is Web3 really transforming different sectors today? Beyond just these technical definitions, where's the impact?
Right, let's talk impact. One of the most visible and I think impactful areas so far is the creator autonomy. Web 2, honestly, presented huge challenges for many creators. It often turned digital art, music, writing into effectively free commodities, valued in likes rather than dollars, with platforms taking the lion's share of any revenue generated. Web 3, however, offers powerful new tools for proper monetization and direct connection with fans. Take the story of the pseudonymous artist Tilplizer. She was this self-taught visual effects artist who created an animation for the DeFi platform Uniswap. She then sold it as an NFT for, I think it was over $500,000 or $525,000. Suddenly, she could monetize her art directly, far beyond just getting likes on social media. And now her project, Shibuya, is aiming to build this kind of decentralized Netflix meets Kickstarter, letting viewers co-fund, own pieces of, and influence the direction of animated films.
That's a massive shift from just consuming content passively to suddenly becoming like a part owner or a co-creator.
It truly is. Or think about Jessie Nixon Lopez. She's a Hollywood screenwriter, worked on shows like Stranger Things. Her startup, MV3, is completely rethinking storytelling. They're selling characters from a new sci-fi universe as NFTs. And if you hold one, you're invited to co-create the intellectual property rights stories, make art, develop the world, and potentially share in the upside if it gets developed further. It's like finally being able to own your own stormtrooper, as she puts it, something totally impossible in the closed IP model of Web 2 entertainment. In music, you have platforms like Audius, co-founded by Ronale Rumberg. It aims to put artists directly in control, letting them build direct relationships with their fans, set their own terms for monetization, and be more resilient against the often extractive model of big Web 2 streaming platforms like Spotify. And someone like Yatsu, the founder of Animoca Brands, a big player in Web 3 gaming, he sees NFTs fundamentally as a store of culture. He argues it's this deeply undervalued economic asset, our shared digital culture, that you can now actually own, trade, and monetize directly thanks to Web 3.
Fascinating examples in the creative space. What about beyond creation? How is Web3 looking to reimagine something as fundamental as traditional finance, which, let's face it, touches almost everyone's life?
Yeah, finance is arguably where some of the most profound and potentially disruptive changes are happening. That's the realm of decentralized finance, or DeFi. It's basically trying to rebuild the entire financial system, lending, borrowing, trading, insurance, using open source protocols, blockchain, and smart contracts without relying on traditional intermediaries like banks. And why? Well, traditional finance, for all its strengths, faces significant issues. Cross-border payments are often incredibly slow and costly, and there's still a staggering 1.4 billion people globally who remain unbanked, completely excluded from the formal financial system. DeFi potentially offers much lower costs, incredibly efficient real-time accounting on the blockchain, and total transparency. Anyone can audit the code and see the flow of funds. And crucially, it allows anyone with an internet connection to transact permissionlessly. Stablecoins are a huge part of this. Coins like USDC, which are pegged to the US dollar. Jeremy Allaire, the CEO of Circle, which issues USDC, envisions it as like an HTTP for money. Basically, an open standard for enabling instant, global, low-cost payments for potentially millions, maybe billions, including those currently unbanked. Just look at the scale. USDC alone powered something like $8.6 trillion in on-chain transactions in a recent period and has a supply of around $45 billion. It's often used for holding and transacting small balances that traditional banks simply wouldn't cater for.
And Bitcoin. Where does the original cryptocurrency fit into this new DeFi landscape? Is it still relevant?
Oh, absolutely. Bitcoin continues to play a really significant role, primarily as a non-sovereign store of value, sort of like digital gold for many people, and also as a medium of exchange, particularly in places where local currencies are unstable or financial freedom is restricted. It's often viewed as a lifeline for the unbanked or a tool for censorship resistance. Organizations like the Human Rights Foundation actively promote its use for activists. Gabriel Abed, who helped pioneer digital currencies in the Caribbean, noted that Bitcoin doesn't judge users based on their creed, race, or income. It's permissionless. Now, the energy consumption critique is still valid for Bitcoin's proof of work, but it's worth noting its increasing use of renewable energy sources. There are even examples like ExxonMobil using flared natural gas that would otherwise be wasted and pollute to power Bitcoin mining operations, which can actually help reduce overall emissions in some cases. But it's not just decentralized options. Governments are also looking closely at this space, exploring their own central bank digital currencies, or CBDCs. While proponents say CBDCs promise efficiency and modernization, many sources we looked at raise pretty significant concerns, especially around privacy. The potential for constant government surveillance of all your spending becomes very real. And there are serious implications for human rights and financial freedom if access can be switched off arbitrarily.
Right, that privacy concern with CBDCs is definitely something to watch. Okay, moving beyond finance, where else is Web3 making a really major splash right now? What are the other big frontiers?
Gaming and the metaverse are definitely proving to be key entry points for mainstream Web3 adoption. We're seeing the rise of play-to-earn and newer win-to-earn models in games like Axie Infinity, which was huge for a while, and newer titles like Parallel. These offer tangible economic incentives for players, turning gaming from just a pastime into potentially a new economic opportunity, especially in developing countries. And looking a bit further ahead, there's the metaverse. This vision of a shared, immersive, persistent virtual space where we might work, play, socialize. It's predicted by some analysts, like Citi, to be worth maybe $8 to $13 trillion by 2030, with potentially 5 billion users. It's a huge projection. But crucially, many sources emphasize, and this is really important, it must be built using Web3 tools and principles like NFTs for asset ownership and self-sovereign identity. Otherwise, the fear is it could become this kind of Orwellian monster or a VR North Korea, as some have warned, a completely centralized, controlled virtual world owned by one or two megacorporations, which is the exact opposite of the open vision.
That sounds like a truly monumental undertaking, building an open metaverse. How is the underlying physical infrastructure possibly going to keep up with this kind of futuristic vision? We need more than just code, right?
That's a fantastic point. You need the physical layer, too. And that's where another fascinating Web3 category comes in, DePIN, which stands for Decentralized Physical Infrastructure Networks. The idea here is to use crypto incentives to coordinate the build-out and operation of real-world infrastructure, but in a decentralized way. For example, think about the massive computing power needed for graphics rendering in the metaverse or for AI. A project like Render Network uses tokens to incentivize people like you and me to contribute our unused GPU power from our home computers to a global network. Artists and creators can then tap into this vast pool of distributed rendering power at a much lower cost than relying on centralized cloud providers. It's democratizing access to high-end graphics rendering. Another cool example is HiveMapper. They're building decentralized global maps to compete with Google Maps. They do this by incentivizing drivers, just regular people, to install special dash cams in their cars. As they drive around, the cameras collect mapping data, and the drivers earn crypto tokens in return. It's turning everyday driving into potentially a new revenue stream while building a community-owned map of the world.
So it's not just about digital stuff then. We're seeing Web3 starting to converge with other really cutting-edge technologies like AI and physical infrastructure, creating even more unexpected possibilities.
Precisely. This convergence is sometimes called the trivergence, Web3, AI, and other frontier tech like IoT coming together. The combination is creating entirely new possibilities. For instance, think about AI development. AI needs vast amounts of high-quality data. Projects like Ocean Protocol are building decentralized marketplaces where data owners can securely share or sell access to their data for AI training while maintaining control and getting compensated, often using privacy-preserving techniques. Though, of course, this convergence also brings up new ethical questions and challenges. You see projects like WorldCoin, co-founded by OpenAI's Sam Altman, which aims to create a global proof of personhood system using retinal scans in exchange for crypto tokens. That obviously raises debates about privacy and biometric data.
Okay, this all sounds incredibly promising, almost revolutionary in some ways, with all these innovations. But let's be real. What about the common criticisms? The challenges, the things you often hear people pushing back on when it comes to Web3. It surely can't all be smooth sailing.
Oh, absolutely not. You're right to ask that. There are significant hurdles and very valid criticisms, and it's crucial to address them head-on. A common one is that Web3 is just a fad, or maybe that it's too skeuomorphic right now, meaning it just mimics things that already exist in the real world, or Web 2. Early websites look just like digital magazines, but that's often how new technologies start, isn't it? They imitate the familiar before finding their truly native forms. The true potential often unfolds over time, sometimes decades. Web3 is still arguably quite early on its S-curve of adoption. It might still be awaiting its ChatGPT moment, that breakthrough application that makes its disruptive power undeniable to everyone.
What about the argument, especially after things like the FTX collapse, that Web3 isn't really decentralized, that power still ends up concentrated?
That's a really important point and a common misconception. The FTX collapse fundamentally was a catastrophic failure of centralization, not a failure of the underlying decentralized technology like Bitcoin or Ethereum. FTX was a centralized exchange run by a small group, allegedly misusing customer funds, exactly the kind of intermediary risk that Web3 aims to route around with things like DeFi and self-custody. Now, is everything in Web3 perfectly decentralized right now? No. Full decentralization is often a journey, a spectrum, not an immediate starting point. It's a difficult, continuous process for projects to achieve and maintain decentralization over time. And on the energy point, the criticism that it wastes energy. As we mentioned, this is largely being addressed. Most new innovation is happening on much more energy-efficient proof-of-stake systems now. And even Bitcoin's energy use, while significant, is often misrepresented. It's increasingly powered by renewables, and as we saw with the ExxonMobil example, it can even incentivize projects that reduce emissions from things like flared gas.
Okay, what about the jobs argument? The concern that Web3, like AI maybe, is primarily a job killer, that it's just going to automate away existing roles in finance or tech.
Actually, the evidence so far points somewhat in the opposite direction. Web3 seems to be creating entirely new job categories that didn't exist before. Think about digital artists earning a living from NFTs, professional gamers and play-to-earn ecosystems, DAO developers and community managers, liquidity miners providing capital to DeFi protocols. These are all new roles. If anything, it seems to be weakening the near monopoly that traditional big tech and finance firms have had on attracting top engineering and creative talent. We're seeing quality engineers and builders increasingly flocking to Web3 startups, drawn by the potential to build and own a piece of the next iteration of the internet.
But the space can also feel, well, a bit Wild West sometimes. It seems plagued by scammers and fraud, which understandably makes a lot of people hesitant to get involved. How does Web3 deal with that?
That's undeniably true, and it's a major barrier to trust and adoption. New economic frontiers, unfortunately, have always attracted bad actors. It's almost a historical pattern. We saw it with the Dutch tulip mania, the South Sea bubble in the 18th century, the dot-com boom and bust. Wherever there's potential for rapid wealth creation and technological disruption, scammers follow. However, it's crucial to distinguish between scams enabled by human behavior and regulatory gaps versus problems inherent to the technology itself. The FTX collapse, again, wasn't a failure of blockchain. It was an alleged massive failure of centralized trust, ethics, and oversight. DeFi protocols that operated transparently on-chain, by contrast, generally continued to function as designed during that crisis. Better user interfaces, more education, and clearer regulation will be key to mitigating these risks over time.
And speaking of regulation, what about governments? Is there a risk they'll just try to crush it with overly heavy-handed rules before it even gets going?
Regulatory uncertainty is definitely one of the biggest challenges facing Web3 right now, particularly in some jurisdictions like the US. We see proposed bills trying to apply traditional financial regulations designed for intermediaries directly onto decentralized software protocols, which often doesn't make sense, and could certainly stifle innovation if poorly implemented. Senator Warren's bill, for example, has drawn criticism for potentially doing this. However, it's not all negative. There's also growing bipartisan interest, believe it or not, in Web3 as a potential alternative to the concentrated power of Web2 big tech platforms. Some policymakers see it as a way to foster competition and user control. Furthermore, international regulations like the EU's Digital Markets Act, DMA, are actively pushing for more open, interoperable online environments. By breaking down the walls of existing gatekeepers, these kinds of rules could actually create a more favorable landscape for Web3 technologies to flourish.
Interesting. So it sounds like maybe that early concern that the incentives just wouldn't be strong enough for people to adopt these new decentralized networks, that maybe that was misplaced.
Yeah, I think it largely was. Tokens, despite early skepticism, have proven to be an immensely powerful tool for bootstrapping networks, as the jargon goes. They provide concrete economic incentives for early adopters, developers, users, investors to contribute effort and capital when the network is small and risky. They essentially turn you, the user, from just a passive consumer into an active economic participant who potentially shares in the network's future success and upside value. This alignment of incentives between the builders and the users is a fundamental shift from the Web 2 model, where users generated immense value for platforms like Facebook or Twitter, but typically had no direct ownership, stake, or share in that value creation.
Okay, so the technology is powerful, the incentives seem to be working. But a key hurdle still feels like usability, doesn't it? Self-custody, managing your own keys. It's powerful, but it's not exactly easy for everyone, at least not yet. It can feel pretty intimidating for the average person.
That's a very, very fair point. You're absolutely right. The user experience, or UX, for purely self-sovereign crypto use managing your own keys securely, interacting with complex protocols. The usability bar is still quite high for mainstream adoption. It requires a certain level of technical understanding and diligence that not everyone has or wants, and that's why, realistically, we'll likely see hybrid models, sometimes called Web 2.5, and trusted user-friendly service providers continue to play a crucial role for broader adoption, at least in the near to medium term. Not everyone needs or wants to be their own bank immediately. But ultimately, Web3, much like the internet itself, didn't just spring out of nowhere. The original internet was heavily seeded by public sector investment, particularly from defense research like ARPANET. Similarly, reaching Web3's full potential will likely require ongoing private-public collaboration. It really needs, as some sources put it, bold, far-sighted, and innovative leadership from governments, not just regulation, but support for research, education, and standards to foster the ecosystem. Because remember, decentralized does not necessarily mean disorganized. You still need coordination and foundational support.
Wow, what a journey we've taken then. From the simple read-only web of the 90s, through the read-write user-generated web we live in now, and now standing on the cusp, it seems, of this potential ownership web. We've explored Web3's evolution, looked under the hood at its core components, things like tokens, smart contracts, DAOs, those fascinating zero-knowledge proofs, and we've touched on its potentially transformative impact across so many areas. Creators, finance, gaming, maybe even the very fabric of the future internet with the metaverse. Hopefully this deep dive was useful for you, helping you become genuinely well-informed on what feels like a really pivotal shift happening in our digital landscape.
Yeah, and if there's one core idea to maybe take away, it's this. If Web 2 democratized your ability to publish content, but then centralized platforms captured most of its value, then Web 3 at its heart is really poised to democratize your ownership of the digital world that you help build and participate in. It's about shifting power back to the edges, back to the users.
So maybe we'll just leave you with this question to ponder. If you truly do become an owner in the digital networks you use every day, the communities you build, the content you create, how might your own life, your work, maybe even your local community actually change? What new opportunities could this unlock for you to participate, to contribute, and to truly own your digital self and your creations in this rapidly evolving landscape? Something to think about.